Hello and welcome to the Focus Friday series with the KU Alumni Association Student Alumni Network. My name is Mykala Sandifer and I serve as the Director of Inclusive Programs and Talent Development with the Alumni Association. I am excited to be your moderator for today's session titled Demystifying Mental Health Myths for College Students. As a reminder, Focus Fridays is a Student Alumni Network program series aimed at providing students with exposure to campus resources, community partners, and the voices of diverse leaders within our Jayhawk community. The Focus Friday series will continue to be offered virtually and will launch each month's first and last Friday. Today, we are highlighting the Health Education Resource Office on campus, or HERO for short. HERO is a source for KU community wellness through partnerships that support innovative approaches towards optimal health while maximizing academic and professional success. They offer programs, presentations, events, and health coaching, which include different content areas such as sexual health, alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, self-management, nutrition, and physical activity. Today, we are excited to have Zach Newby with us from HERO. Zach came to KU after some time in the DC area. They completed their degree in community health. Here at KU, they run the Healthy Choices in Daily Life programs. They are responsible for the alcohol, cannabis, and other drugs, along with self-management content areas for HERO. Thanks, Zach, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you all so much for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation and to chat with the Alumni Center and get some information out to folks that are going to be following along. This is a cool comment to a family rep panels.
Awesome. Well, as for the flow of our conversation, I will ask a question and provide space for you to respond. Easy enough. Are you ready?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, let's get started. Let's start with the basics. Talk to us about why it's important for us to even talk about mental health.
Yeah, for sure. So this is kind of like a threefold answer for me. Kind of starting off the base, which is something that I'm probably going to mention in a lot of these questions, is mental health, right? That term is such a large like umbrella term, right? It covers so many things. It means so many different things to all different people, right? So for me, right, the first thing why it's important to talk about mental health in general is to educate, right? To start, like you're saying, this whole conversation about demystifying what mental health is. So educate folks, right? When folks come to college, rather that be as a student, as professional staff, faculty, whatever, our interactions with mental health, what mental health means to us is all over the place. So if we can start educating folks about what it actually means to take care of yourself, what survival is, what mental health is, what self-care is, what all these different things are, we can start to move on to the bigger things, which is like destigmatizing talks about mental health and normalizing, right? People interacting with mental health in a way that might not be typical, that might be atypical, and different from other people, right? So the first one is just education in general, just like talk about it, get folks knowing what it means in different ways, different terms, general stuff. And then the second one would be like destigmatizing those conversations around it. In a lot of different communities, a lot of different identities, this conversation looks extremely different and exists for a lot of different reasons. So if we can start destigmatizing, like people talk about mental health, talk about like, they might be struggling with mental health, how mental health might be more, detrimental to them at this time in their life versus a different time in their life, how it looks different for them versus someone else, what it looks like to have a diagnosable like mental health disorder versus like you are feeling something at that moment, because that is all mental health, right? We can start like I said, destigmatizing those conversations. So people, next point, normalizing it, right? Actually having conversations around it, which is kind of the bigger point here and the whole point of this, right? Just to be normal, right? Whatever that means, like talking about these things and having conversations so we can help people get resources that they need, start educating them so they can kind of discover themselves and discover what mental health means to them.
That's awesome. There is just so much, I think, just language and to your point, learning and unlearning certain things around mental health. And so really excited to have the space to talk about it. Can you talk to us next a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got involved and engaged in this work?
Yeah, for sure. So like you mentioned, I moved from the DMV, particularly Nova and DC, so Northern Virginia and DC. I moved here after working in EMS. I got a degree in emergency medical services, and I loved the aspect of interacting with people in a health setting, particularly talking to them about why these things are happening to them, educating them what they can do next, and kind of connecting those dots in between the care. I just didn't like being a first responder, right? So I found that public health, that education with people kind of made sense to me. It was easy for me to interact with people that way. So I wanted to continue my education, and my parents lived here my dad lived here in Wichita. So I applied to KU and got accepted to the community health program in the School of Ed. And then my last semester there, we did an internship, and I had my internship with SAPEC, the Sexual Assault Prevention Education Center. So I kind of got my feet wet with higher ed, and I found that I really liked interacting with students. We had peer educators there that I got to interact with. We start to having all sorts of really cool conversations and kind of new ways to have the conversations of things that exist on campus and norms on campus. And then I applied to this job, and it just so happened that my supervisor now, Jenny McKee, was actually one of my old professors. It just kind of worked full circle. And I actually didn't even apply for the position that I'm in. I applied to be a health educator for the sexual health position and got this one, and actually it was a way better fit. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to students about the things that I get to do.
Yeah, well, we're glad we got to have you and keep you, and for all the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So next, can you kind of talk to us a little bit about how the college experience can have an impact on your mental health and what that could look like?
Yeah, for sure. So how doesn't college impact our mental health, right? I'm going to try to do my best to kind of dice through this question to kind of show the good and the bad here, right? Because I think that is like the answer that is based in reality, that there is both good and bad here. So the first good and the overwhelming good, right? I think the impacts that college and university can have on our mental health is, for a lot of folks, can be that first taste of like real autonomy, right? Not for everyone, right? People are forced to be an adult at earlier ages than other folks, but for a lot of people, right, that first taste of autonomy and freedom and independence is detrimental in the best way, right? So folks get to come to college, they get to choose their own schedule. They get to choose what type of education they want to go into. They might, for the first time, get to choose their own support network, their own community, right? Those communities might look like identities that they have, passion areas that they have, right? And that'll be the first time that folks get to do that. And that is incredible. And it is incredible for mental health, right? To find a support system, to find places that you can exist and feel safe and protected sometimes, right? That can be incredible and super beneficial. Along with that is like, when you have that space to be able to grow and maybe feel safe, right, you can start to figure out things about yourself, right? So if you might, before you came to KU, right, or any university, you might be forced to like kind of like not necessarily like deny parts of yourself, but may not be able to feel safe and protected to be parts of yourself, right? Like queer, trans students, Black, brown students, right? They might not have the opportunity to be themselves and exist on campus or exist before they get to campus. And while KU might not provide that, right, they might have that first opportunity that they can, right? And that can be detrimental to your mental health. You might just to be able to exist and feel safe. So definitely some positive impacts there. And then some cons, right? Pretty much everything I just said, right? It has that twofold, right? That first taste of autonomy and freedom and kind of being just thrown out there to make these decisions can be super overwhelming, right? And it can feel like a lot of responsibility that you didn't have before, which can cause a lot of stress, right? Academia is set up for a lot of folks that have a particular mindset, right? And that mindset is like getting here for 4 years, getting a job, getting career oriented, and that doesn't work for everyone, right? So it can be really hard to find your place in a community that is set up to thrive for those folks, right? So it might cause extra stress, might cause anxiety, and it might just make you feel like you don't fit in some places, right? So a lot of potentially good and a lot of potentially bad can come from like experiencing college in general. And I think it would be hard to not mention COVID, right? Right now, it is, I met with my daily life program, which is our stress management, our self-management program, has been super busy because a lot of folks have been stressed. A lot of folks have been anxious. A lot of folks have had a hard time like dealing with time management because everything was thrown to the wind the last 2 years, right? There's been a pandemic, civil rights movements, monumental historical events that have been happening. So it makes sense that we have had a hard time dealing with that, and that has an impact on our mental health, especially for folks that may not learn the best learning virtually, right? We want to be virtual so we can be safe, but some folks just can't learn that way. That's just kind of the reality there. COVID has had a big learning curve for a lot of folks, for better or for worse, right? We have had to learn the ways that we learn best, rather it be in person, rather it be virtual, rather it be different types of assignments or presentations. It has presented students the opportunity to learn that about themselves, while also causing an immense amount of stress. So yeah, kind of all the things there.
Yeah, no, I think, as we've all, to your point, experienced, the impacts and effects of the pandemic, I felt like personally my heart went out to students because I, just couldn't imagine having to manage all of that if you're either on your way in, on your way out, somewhere in the middle. And just having that major life event and how that's affected the mental health of our students. So I think that's fair to say, at the least.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you now, we're going to shift gears a little bit and ask for you to share with us some common myths or misconceptions about mental health. And then I probably have a second part to that question, but we'll start there.
Cool. Yeah. So this is a question that was like really hard for me to think about, right? I think mainly because mental health means, kind of like I mentioned at the beginning, means so many different things to so many different people, right? And I think the main point that I want to talk about here is kind of just like folks taking a one size fits all approach to mental health and mental health diagnoses and results and ways to kind of tackle mental health. And what I mean by that is, like I said, mental health means something different for everybody. Like for one person, that might mean that you have a diagnosable thing. You have diagnosed anxiety, you have diagnosed depression, right? For someone else, it might mean that you have some like random intrusive thoughts that pop up, or that you experience like anxiety at different parts of the day because of a relationship you're in. All those things are super real, super valid, and also different realms and on a spectrum of what mental health it means to people. So I think the biggest kind of myth and misconception is that there's like mental health means mental health disorders, right? And that's definitely not true. Just because on top of that, right, the accessibility between like therapists and prescription medication is not a thing that exists for people all over the place, right? Of different class and race and everything, right? So getting it down to a diagnosable like or a mental health condition would just not be fair to people and not equitable, because it's something completely different. If you don't have the access to go to a therapist and say like this is what it means to me, or have the like be able to go get medication to treat it in that way, that doesn't make that thing less valid or less real, right? So just that there's no one size fits all to that approach. Yeah, and then the other kind of misconception there is that um, that mental health and mental health disorders and struggling with mental health in general makes you weak, right? That's just not true. This is something that folks deal with all the time across all different spheres, all communities, all identities. It is something that people are dealing with all the time. You hear that phrase that you are not alone, and that is definitely true. But in a way to kind of concretely say what that means is that your experience, right, is like your singular experience is definitely going to be unique. The things that you are feeling and that those relationships, the things that you did, definitely unique. However, some of those feelings other people might have experienced before, right? So you're not alone in experiencing those things, and finding folks that maybe have felt those similar ways or similar things, right, can be really affirming, and hearing those stories. So just that misconception of like it makes you weak or that you are completely alone is not true. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that was really well articulated. And one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking was going to be my kind of follow-up question to that is, as we think about, diversity, equity, and inclusion right now, and how the experiences, you mentioned of different identities of students, kind of how they experience mental health in maybe different communities, and how they view and accept or don't accept mental health, and conversations around that. Is there anything that you'd highlight specific to an identity that maybe you've worked with for students where you've kind of had to help them overcome some myths or misconceptions around mental health culturally?
Yeah. So I definitely think the one that is like the easy like comes to mind most generally is definitely like men, right? And men and at KU, right? Students at KU definitely sometimes have a hard time opening up that they are struggling with their mental health at all, right? That things might feel funky, things might feel different, they might feel sad, they might feel anxious about things. And what does that mean to them? Does it mean that they feel weak or that they're less than other people, that they're incapable? No, that's not at all what it means. I think that is definitely like the most common I would say identity that comes to mind that I work with the most. And then on top of that, I would say a lot of students of marginalized and oppressed identities, so Black and Brown, Indigenous students, and international students that I've met with often come into the face of like professors, faculty, staff, whatever, not believing the things that they say, right? Saying that the things that they have felt, that they have experienced, and they be the most real, the most visceral, the most physical things that are happening to them, and oftentimes are dismissed, right? Because either their opinion isn't taken as seriously, or they're from a different country, so it means something different here. I would say that's like, those are the two top kind of identities that have those things tied to them.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's important to kind of call that stuff out, because I think it just creates space for it, and really helps people understand that as we're talking about mental health, that experience is unique to us as individuals, but even culturally, there are additional layers
Yeah,
to be considered. So I appreciate that.
yeah, of course.
Okay, so let's talk about how we can support students who may be experiencing some challenges. So can you talk to us about how we know if we need to seek additional help?
Yeah, for sure. I'm so glad that you brought this up, because this is one of those things that I love to talk about when it comes to kind of any harm prevention, rather it be alcohol, drugs, self-care and self-management and mental health. With that, I say is that you know yourself best, right? It is really, like I said before, there's no one size fits all. There's definitely no one size fits all here. There's no guidelines that people can follow to be like, I felt this, 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 and this, or they showed this, this, and this. This means now I need to go on to this step in this. This reaching out for help and needing like further some sort of intervention, whatever, continuity of care is going to show up so differently for so many different people. So that's like the main thing that I want to say, because right, for one person, this might show up in a baseline, I feel X. Baseline, I feel sad. I might feel depressed, right? But these last 2 weeks, it has been a little bit different. It's been worse. It's been a little bit too overwhelming. And I've thought about maybe I should reach out to the therapist, right? There's your sign, right? Your baseline is it's been a little more intense, a little harder to deal with than usual. You thought about maybe further something, reaching out for help, something, right? You know yourself best in those situations. So that's kind of one of those signs. And that's kind of like that guideline that I would follow with these is, if you know someone, you know their baseline of how they normally act, how they normally respond to situations, their emotional well-being, right? All the things. That's the best way to tell. It's like when there's a change in those baseline. A great time to talk about, the Health Education Resource Office. We have the 8 dimensions of wellness. We have physical health, we have academic, financial, alcohol, drugs, all the things, right? That you are a whole ass person. There are so many things that make you a human. So we can't just talk about one at a time. This is one of those things, especially if you are in a close relationship with someone and you can see that like their academics might be off, meaning that, they're struggling on meeting deadlines. They're struggling on getting somewhere on time. They're stressed about money a little bit more than usual because they've been maybe spending a little bit different. While of course, all these things could be indications of other things happening in their life, it could also be an indication, right, that maybe that person is struggling with their mental health at that time. Yeah, so everyone knows themselves the best. Yeah, that's what I have to say with that question. Sorry, I was trying to sum it up very nicely, but yeah, everyone, you know yourself the best, and that's honestly like the best advice I have.
Yeah, no, I think that's important too. I think it reminds us to really pause and stop and just check in with ourselves from time to time. I
Yeah,
think to that point, yes, we know ourselves best, but do we give ourselves the space to kind of say like, hey, how am I feeling today? How does this compare to how I was feeling yesterday or a week ago? So I think that's a really important reminder for all of
Yeah.
us to kind of do
I'm
that.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No,
Uh,
you're fine.
I'm so glad you said that. That was part of the conversation I had earlier with a coworker of just like, sometimes things are so intense and so stressful and the world is going on around us. It already feels like there's so much going on. So it's hard to be like, oh wait, this feels a little bit more intense. Exactly what you're saying. Just like that check-in can be an amazing thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we think about, we're talking about practices, right? So that's a practice for self-care is making sure you're checking in with yourself. What would be some healthy practices that you would advocate for students that you think can contribute to their positive mental health?
Yeah, for sure. This is something that I could talk about forever. So I was excited to see this question because I come at it a couple of different ways, right? I think there are a lot of things that we are told to do in the realm of like self-care or taking care of yourselves, or like what it means to be students and like be productive, right? And I want to like throw all that out the window, right? So right now, especially between talking about self-care, right? I've had this conversation, I think, like on or this topic kind of on the Instagram and with the interview I did with someone else is like self-care is kind of like, I don't want to say like played out, right? But there's a lot more nuances to the terms of self-care. And I think lately, right, we're not like self-caring, right? We are in the mode of like trying to live and be human and keep surviving and keep going. And that is way different, right? Like that survival mode type stuff is way different than actual self-care. So I want to name that, right? Like taking care of yourself and being able to do those things that you can like live and you can make sure that you can keep going is different than self-care. So finding those things that you need to do to thrive and survive, right? So, these things typically come up in the realm of conversations of quote unquote vices. And I want to challenge that, right? So these things that might be normally, there's like food and shopping, sex, alcohol, drugs. These things definitely can be vices. These are definitely be things that can be, used in a way that harm yourself or harm others. However, used in a way to cope and take care of yourselves and like thrive and get through the day, right? In a manageable sense, in a way that you can control and control that relationship and that behavior, right? That's when something is like that coping and the survival. And I would name like finding those things can be okay. And dealing with those relationship, those things can be okay, especially as we go into finals, right? A stressful time. And for some folks who are transitioning out of university back home, right? So, home might look like a whole different world for them for a number of different reasons. It might be worse situation, might be a better situation. So that transition period and finding these coping skills and ways to survive, right, can be super beneficial. So find those things for you. On top of that, right, some of those things that are often brought up are like sleep, nutrition, and like hydration, right? Like the basic stuff. And I think these are great things to talk about because those are things that we can use to fuel ourselves and help us do the things that we want to do. I want to push back on the narrative of like you always have to get 7 or 8 hours of sleep. You have to eat X amount of greens. You have to like exercise so many hours, right? Of course, we know that all these things are not accessible to everyone. Everyone can't go out and buy greens all the time. It's expensive. You don't necessarily have the time to sleep 6 to 8 hours all the time, right? So I want to urge students to do the things within these realms that help them do the things that they need to do, right? What that looks like is like with food is the easy one, right? If you are someone who likes to work out, right, then I say eat something that helps you do that workout, right? If that means like you need a carb load because you have a big lift coming up, eat those carbs, right? However, if you are someone who like loves comfort food, like for me, mac and cheese is going to hit that button, right? It's going to release dopamine in my brain. So I would say to me, eat that mac and cheese when you are stressed, when you are anxious, when you, especially during finals or something, eat that thing, right? Do the thing that you need that fuels you. Same thing with sleep. Sleep is a great one to talk about because obviously we know that like an optimal world, if we can get 7 to 9 hours of sleep, great. Not based in reality for a lot of people, especially college students who might be working and studying for finals and doing all the things, right? So talk about this in kind of a specific again, like nuanced way, meaning that if you have a big test coming up and you have to cram for that test, or you have a big project and you had to work the entire day before and now you have to get that project done, it is not fair to yourself to set the standard that you need to get 8 hours of sleep for that night, right? If that looks like you have to pull an all-nighter, that's okay. But make sure that you tell yourself and you hold yourself to a standard that you're going to make up those hours at a different time, right? We can't keep pulling and pulling and pulling without, like refilling that. My coworker said it well, right? Of sleep. You need that is something that you need. So again, back to those vices. If you're doing it in a way that harms yourself, that's one thing. But if you're doing it so that you can survive and cope the next day, in this case, losing some sleep so you can complete a project, right? That makes sense to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the sleep. I need my rest.
Yeah.
I'm good without it. And I try to keep myself accountable where if I'm in a situation where I know I'm not going to get the hours I need, finding space to make that up later because again, no good.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for saying that, because that's like the other realm of that spectrum of like, if someone needs like 10 hours of sleep, right? It might be like, you might feel shame. Like society tells you that like, if you sleep more than 8 hours, like you're lazy. Not true. And if you need those 10 hours, get those 10 hours so you can be human and do stuff and you can feel okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 1,000%. So you talked a little bit about finals, and so that was going to be one of my last questions. But I guess you talked about it a little bit and kind of some things to support students. But are there any additional resources that you'd like to highlight that Hero has available for students as they prep for finals and transition for life as they kind of leave KU?
Yeah. So do you mean like hero specific or like across campus?
Um, all of
Sorry.
the resources, whichever,
Okay.
yeah, whatever you want to share.
Yeah. So of course, Hero, right? We offer one-on-one health coaching sessions for students from a variety of things. We have Afton who does physical activity, nutrition, tobacco cessation. Rachel who does sex positive coaching and has a lot of opportunities for volunteers with our peer health educators. And then I do the daily life and the alcohol cannabis conversation. So definitely, if you have any like specific questions or want to chat with someone, or even just like kind of hang out and bullshit for an hour about these subjects, you can come and you can hang out with us and we can chat in our offices. Um, Outside of that, we do have one of my favorite events and kind of like the re-premiere, right? The re-grand opening of Stress Busting Study Breaks and Therapy Animals. We partner with Loving Paws and they bring dogs out to 6 or 7 different locations this week and next week all together. So you can come out to Anschutz, you can come out to Watson, Murphy Hall is tomorrow, which is the first one we're doing with the school music. And you can get a Stress Busting Study Break kit, which is like a self-care zine, a coloring page. We also have some snacks, chips, water, all sorts of stuff. And you can also come and pet some dogs. So that's pretty cool. So obviously us, but then outside of us, there's so many awesome resources on campus. The first one to mention is CAPS. CAPS is upstairs at Watkins Health Services. It's counseling and psychological services. So they're on campus psychologists that you can come and you can chat to. They can do an intake the day of, but there is a wait time afterwards. There's also the psych clinic. So there's a lot of like grad students that are working at KU that you can meet with. Those are kind of like direct mental health resources past that. Some important people on campus, especially as we like go into finals and thinking about transitions, is student money management services, right? So, if you have outstanding tickets, if you're worried about a budget over the summer, you need to find a job, you're worried about your lease, whatever, they're awesome. They can help you out. They're good folks to talk to. And then past that, kind of going back to finding your, mental health and how it impacts you here at KU is finding your community here on campus. So folks like the OMA, SGD, right? These are folks on campus that create intentional spaces for students. So those are really great resources, especially the next 2 weeks as, people are stressed and anxious and trying to navigate everything.
Oh yeah, we hit the jackpot. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Those are awesome. Very last question as we start to wrap up here. Where can students go and how can they learn more about Hero? What website, social media? How do they get more information?
Yeah, definitely. So if you type in KU Hero, we are the first thing that pops up on Google. Our marketing people and graphic designer have just worked on a new website. So we have our fancy new website with resources all over it. So if you go to the Hero, the KU website, that is a great place to make like appointments with us and outside resources. You can also follow us on Instagram. During the pandemic, we made our own Instagram, right? So you can follow the Health Education Resource Office on Instagram. We do a lot of Instagram talks. We have like sex positive Fridays, mindful Mondays, all sorts of cool stuff there.
Awesome. Well, Zach, this has been so great. Thank you so much for helping us highlight the importance of mental health, dismantling associated myths, and providing students with tools and resources for support, especially with finals around the corner. We appreciate the work you're doing in this space and the impact you're making at KU for our students. As a reminder, we will launch Focus Friday sessions on the first and final Friday of each month, and each session will focus on a different topic, highlighting campus and community partners within the KU community. For more details about this session and other opportunities, they can be found at our website, kualumni.org/programs. Lastly, if you have any questions about Focus Fridays, please don't hesitate to reach out by emailing us at kualumni@kualumni.org. Thank you, Zach, for your time today. We appreciate it. And thanks everybody for watching. Rock Chalk.
Thank you so much.